And good evening, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to my channel. It is called McDuff Lives 2. And so he does. We carry on the McDuff tradition here at McDuff Lives 2. Welcome. It's Friday night. Tonight I have a Mindfields on tap for you on the subject of, well, mass formation is the term I've seen used in the past few days. Mass formation reminds me of the word of transformation, the word used by Kathy O'Brien in her book, The Transformation of America. The Transformation of America is a very important piece of work. And she is a very important person that has exposed a tremendous, uh, horrible wrongdoings to her family, and many other people, and it's all part of the ongoing efforts at two things. First, individual mind control. Can we put somebody in a position that they do what we want them to do? And my father is an example of that, because here he was in the position of being the top planner for all secret operations run through the Pentagon at a time when President Kennedy had ordered that all secret operations had to go through the Pentagon. Well, that puts him in an incredibly uh, difficult position when you have these secret operations people from the CIA, the DIA, the CIC. I mean, Naval Intel. How many other could you name? And there's more that I could ever name, because some of them are still secret. But they all didn't want to run their operations through somebody else's, um, eyes. Doesn't want to see anybody else to see their ops. I mean, if anybody that's read anything about special ops knows that you just can't let your plans out. So anyway, that was what Kennedy wanted. He put my dad in that position, and so then what happens is in the atmosphere of the times is that you have Alan Dulles, Richard Bissell, Sidney Gottlieb, Richard Helms, Frank Wisner, Ted Shackley, a number of people in the operations side of the CIA that are quite willing and experienced in using mind control techniques, both drugs and psychological manipulation, to manipulate an individual. And I do believe that we've shown that that did happen to my father. And if you want to learn more about it, just read my book. And at the end of the book, of course, we have the question of, can I ever prove, that it was a health alteration committee, Sidney Gottlieb job that uh, uh, ended up destroying my family and destroying my father? Or, was I just in the wrong place at the wrong time? But yeah, thanks, Aaron. There's Aaron. Aaron's running the board tonight. Thank you, Aaron Adler, a good friend and a great patriot. Aaron is. Um, so there you go. Now let's let's turn over to the other side, because that's the topic for tonight, and that is the mass formation, the the control of people in groups. And that, I would say, is the main topic for tonight. So I started into this tonight by looking at an article that I was referred to by our good friend Garland Nixon. I'm just going to call it up here for, hang on a second. And this article is at the WordPress site of Thomas Casey, who is a blogger. And let me put this up on the screen so you can see what I'm looking at as I read some of it. Okay, so you can see the web page, Thomas Casey, and I wanted to read some of this because what Garland Nixon was talking about was how is it that so many seemingly intelligent people can still believe the narrative even though we show them over and over and over again evidence that the narrative doesn't work? The emperor has no clothes, and still they don't see. They still think they see some clothes on that old bastard. And the emperor, i- is dead. I mean, there's nothing there except for the illusion. But that illusion is so strong that when presented with contrary facts, I mean, real facts, they still can't pull themselves away from the narrative. So that's what got me thinking about this topic. Okay, so let's read a little bit from this man who, again, Garland Nixon referred me to this gentleman, and here's an essay about him by Thomas Casey. Mass Formation by Dr. Matthias Desmet, professor of psychology, University of Ghent. That's in Belgium. I came across this information about mass formation and how we are being socially engineered en masse into totalitarianism worldwide. It's from a psychology professor at the University of Ghent in Belgium. Anyway, I took notes from what Professor Matthias Desmet, who also has a master's degree in statistics, observed about the way we are being induced into this sort of mass hypnosis with regards to COVID 19. Uh-oh, I just said it. Um, blank, blank, blank. It really explains a lot about how things got to where we are now. A lot of this is paraphrased from what Dr. Matthias spoke of. So please go to him as the source. And now Matthias refers to a professor, Gustave Le Bon, about crowds. Le Bon theorized that the new entity, quote, the psychological crowd, unquote, which emerges from incorporating the assembled population, not only forms a new body, but also creates a collective, quote, unconsciousness, unquote, a collective unconsciousness. Four conditions need to be present to create mass formation. Number one, there needs to be a lot of socially isolated people or people who experience a lack of social bond. Two, people who experience a lack of sense making, unable to come to sensible conclusions. Three, there's a lot of free floating anxiety, FFA. Free floating because there's nothing to connect their anxiety to, no focal point, unable to identify what's causing, and so no way to deal with it. Four, there's also a lot of free floating psychological discontent. People may experience their daily lives as lacking any purpose or meaning. Free floating anxiety is the most painful psychological phenomenon to experience and leads to panic attacks. In this state of unfocused anxiety, the mind tries to connect its anxiety to something as an object of anxiety, quote unquote. The next piece of the puzzle is a strategy to deal with this object of anxiety. So, when these preconditions are highly present within a population, and then the media provides a narrative which indicates a focal point for this anxiety, while at the same time describing a strategy to deal with the object of anxiety, then all the anxiety connects to this object of anxiety. If a large segment of people are willing to follow this strategy to deal with this object of anxiety, no matter the cost, then in a second step, people start a collective and heroic battle with this, quote, object of anxiety, unquote, And in that way, a new kind of social bond emerges. And with that, a new kind of, quote, sense making or purpose. Suddenly, life is all directed towards battling this object of anxiety. This creates new sense of connectedness with others in the mass formation. This sudden and radical switch from the negative state of lack of social connection to the opposite, a massive increase in social connection, leads to a mental intoxication similar to hypnosis. People in this hyper focused state are narrowly focused. In hypnosis, only the hypnotized are focused in this way. The hypnosis expert is not narrowly focused. In mass formation, leaders emerge which are even more narrowly focused than the followers. When people experience this mental intoxication, it no longer matters if the narrative is wrong or even blatantly false. What matters is that it leads up to this mental intoxication. This is why they will continue to go along with the narrative. The resistance to understanding the narrative is false or wrong is driven by the fear of returning to the state of free floating anxiety and wanting to continue to experience the mental intoxication. Wow, I love this. This makes so much sense to me. I mean, I have pictures of my friends in never mind. This explains why arguing based on facts will not work. Facts no longer matter to them. Given the facts, are, they have become unable to come to sensible conclusions, even in their own best interests. Mass formation is also similar to mass hypnosis in terms of people's willingness to put up with things normally intolerable. Standard hypnosis is used in place of anesthesia during minor surgeries, and the subjects experience no pain as they are being cut into. In mass formation, people do not get egotistical at all. Rather, to the contrary, mass formation focuses the attention so much on one point that you can take everything away from people their physical well being, their material well being, and they won't even notice its absence. In mass formations, people become radically intolerant of dissident voices. This person threatens to wake the people up, and they get angry when confronted by the initial anxiety and discontent they experience by challenges to the official doctrine. The crowd directs all their aggression at dissident voices. At the same time, they are radically tolerant of their leaders who pronounce the mainstream narrative. These people can lie and cheat and do everything they want and will always be forgiven by the crowd. All the lying, dishonesty, and misbehavior is seen by the crowd as doing it for their own safety. So, knowing the nature of the control mechanisms mass formation exerts, what to do to wake them up? Well, we don't know the answer. At least it's not revealed in this blog by Thomas Casey. But let me catch a sip of ginger honey tea here and we'll move along. One of the problems with having a mute button is you have to remember to unmute it. Mute, unmute. So this is Daniel Estulin's book, 2014, Tavistock Institute, and it's one that I've had on the shelf. I haven't read it cover to cover, but as I got back into this subject over the past few days. I've went through my library to find what I had, and I think this is a pretty good introduction. So, but one of the things that I think is very interesting is that the first big quote in the book is he is quoting Lyndon LaRouche from a article that Lyndon LaRouche organization wrote back in 1980. So we'll explore that as well. All right. Oh, I got my little book stand here. Okay, this is introduction to Daniel Estulin book called Tavistock Institute. Tavistock in Sussex, England, quote, is the world's center for mass brainwashing and social engineering activities, unquote. From a somewhat crude beginning at Wellington House grew a sophisticated organization that was to shape the destiny of the entire planet, and in the process change the paradigm of modern society. In this revolutionary work, which undoubtedly will have the effect of a 500 kiloton nuclear explosion, we uncover both the Tavistock Institute network and the methods of brainwashing and psychological warfare being adapted then and now for application to large scale social engineering projects. This is the quote, Aquarian conspiracy, as the brainwashers refer to themselves, referring to a super secret 1974 Stanford Research Institute study entitled Changing Images of Man. You can think of this book as essentially an anti brainwashing combat manual. Brainwashing depends on the ignorance of the victims. It's all around us. We can all perceive disintegration of our nations in terms of day to day personal experiences. However, this is not a coincidence. It is not an accident. What we are witnessing all around us is a planned disintegration of the world economy by the most powerful people in the world. A planned disintegration of the world economy by the most powerful people in the world. Just a little detour back to this book, which we were looking at a week or two ago, The World Order, Our Secret Rulers by Eustace Mullins, and the beginning of that book. What will have to take place is a gradual adaptation of the social, economic, and political system of the United States to the imperatives of world order. As we've studied, the point is to break down America's economy to the point that it's equal to that of the Soviet Union back in the 50s when this plan was devised, so that we were going to become poorer and poorer in order to be equal with the average Soviet citizen in terms of our economic capacity. And that was going to lead to the world order, the new world order. It was obviously be too expensive for them to raise the Soviet Union citizens up to the American civil standard of living, right? So they stuck with plan A. Let's just lower the standard of living in the Western countries, in the United States primarily. And, they've been gradually draining our assets away from us, right? Well, they're also attacking us psychologically. I was recently reading, and I've been fascinated with the Eastern Front in World War II for about 6 months now, and just following the Battle of Stalingrad, uh, everything I can find, and so fascinated with all of that. The Russian uh, The Russian experience was just unbelievable, and the ability of those Nazi leaders to get their troops to just murder people, that's all part of psychological warfare as well, as getting your troops to do what just completely violate their own principles in order to obey orders. Well, that's that's called a success in the mind control business. This book on the Tavistock Institute attempts to show that the conspiracy is real, who is behind it, what are its financial long-term objectives, and how we the people can stop them from taking us to hell. Beyond utter rage and indignation, the conclusion you, the reader, will reach is that the moral, material, cultural, and intellectual decay that we are witnessing helplessly every day across the globe is not accidental, but a deliberately induced social crisis. I repeat, this is not a test. This is real, and what's at stake is the future of our planet. In the world of smoke and mirrors, there are no flukes, no coincidences, and no accidents. This we prove beyond any reasonable doubt, just as we would have to if we were disputing this case in a court of law. Only the highest standard of excellence and proof will serve our objectives. What's in the balance is the future of the planet, the immortality of the human race, and the survival of our species. During World War II, Tavistock was the headquarters of the British Army's Psychological Warfare Bureau, which, through the arrangement of the Special Operations Executive, the SOE, also dictated policy to the United States Armed Forces in the matters of psychological warfare. Look around you. As the result of a frontal assault on our future by the world's leading social scientists and behavioral engineers, the moorings of our national moral purpose collapsed. We, the people, have surrendered to a morally indifferent irrationality. Make no mistake, everything from the New Left to Watergate to Vietnam to Pentagon Papers to the insane hippies, the anti war movement, and the drug rock counterculture were all also pre planned social engineering projects. I'm sorry. I love the Grateful Dead too. Santana. I mean, I was right in the middle of it, you know, and it did seem, what really just used to always just shock the hell out of me was the incredible musicianship, the incredible ability to put together these amazing harmonies, these incredible singing, and where did these people come from? I was amazed at them. Well, it's a shame to think of our cultural icons as having been molded in order to further the objections of the deep state, the secret hand. Did you see that picture of Boris Johnson with uh, Lynn de Rothschild it's going around there? And I just noticed he's got his hand in his pocket, in his jacket pocket. The hidden hand. What's under assault are not only our individual human rights, but rather the very institution of the nation state, republic, from the oligarchy's massive social engineering program conducted through Tavistock Institute for Human Relations and other much larger integrated networks of centers applied social psychology and social engineering that emerged in the aftermath of World War II. These groups regard us and the principles of nation states as their axiomatic philosophical enemy. This interlocked juggernaut of evil consists of some of the world's most prestigious centers of knowledge and research, such as Stanford Research Center at Stanford University, Rand Corporation, MIT Sloan, the Advanced Center of Behavioral Sciences at Palo Alto, the Institute of Social Research at the University of Michigan, the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania, the Harvard Business School, London School of Economics, the National Training Laboratories, the Hudson Institute, Esalen Institute, the National Institute of Mental Health, the National Institute of Drug Abuse, the Office of Naval Research. There are others, such as the Geneva based International Foundation for Development Alternatives and Executive Conference Center. Well, that's a mouthful. What's that? And why is it in Geneva? And is that a good point for me to remind everybody? We're very excited around here. We're going to have Sean Ross of uh, uh, of YouTube fame, Giureh, Giureh, and he will tell us all about the nation, the people, the country called Switzerland that he refers to as Swissy. So, Geneva, eh? Which is the first full-time Age of Aquarius graduate school charged with teaching behavior modification for high-level executives from Fortune's top 500 companies. Human zombies placed at top-level management positions to lead us into the new dark age of transcendental consciousness. Two foci. First, change is needed in the United States, and second, the global order. Over the period of half a century, tens of billions of dollars have been allocated by the government of the United States with surreptitious help from think tanks and foundations aligned with Tavistock to fund the work of these groups. Foundations. That's going to be one of my top themes is foundations, from Isaac Asimov to the Ford Foundation. This whole thing of foundations is just there's so much. It's like foundations is like the curtain that that the man behind the curtain hides behind. That curtain is called the foundations. Anyway, every aspect of the mental and psychological life of people on the planet was profiled, recorded, and stored into computer systems. Above the closely cooperating groups of social scientists, psychologists, psychiatrists, anthropologists, think tanks, and foundations presides the elite of powerful members of the oligarchy, comprised mostly of, okay, comprised mostly of, come on, class, you've been studying. Now let's go back and try it one more time. Above the closely cooperating groups of social scientists, psychologists, psychiatrists, anthropologists, think tanks, and foundations presides the elite of powerful members of the oligarchy, comprised mostly of Harry Seldon. That's right, the Seldon Plan. Well, no, that's not. That's the answer to a different question, but it's the right answer because that means you've read Foundation. Yeah, mass formations, foundations. Okay, the answer is powerful members of the oligarchy comprise mostly of the old Venetian black nobility. Okay, you didn't study your Webster Tarpley. Anyway, the black nobility, we've talked about it many times on the show. Look it up if you're not familiar with it. It's important concept, just like foundations. What is the purpose of these behavior modifications, you may ask? It is to bring about forced changes to our way of life without our agreement and without our ever realizing what is happening to us. The ultimate goal being, quote, the complete extirpation of mankind's inner sense of identity. the tearing out of mankind's innermost soul, and the placement in the vacant space of an artificial synthetic pseudo soul. However, in order to change mankind's behavior away from industrial production into spiritualism and to bring us willfully into the world of post industrial era zero growth and zero progress, one must force first a change in mankind's self image, its fundamental conception of what we are. Thus, the image of man appropriate to that new era must be sought, synthesized, and then wired into mankind's brain. Hmm. Yeah, I want to implant, you know? Of course, follow what Andy's been working on. It just got these little bitty tiny little copper dots they can do. They're trying to get into our brains in so many ways. As Professor John McMurtry wrote in his 2001 opening address at the Science for Peace Forum held at the University of Toronto, quote, totality of rule is not the only parameter of totalitarianism. Limitedness of power also proceeds from an omnipresent center. In the new totalitarian movement, quote, this omnipresent directive force communicates through behavior modification and identity change, the dominant nodes of the interlocked system. Psychological terror is not the essence, quote, but the punctuation mark of the new totalitarianism's meaning. The money and consumption command channel is the secret of the movement's success because it avoids responsibility for its failures. Wall Street prescribed market failures to provide for societies are, instead, always attributed to transcendental forces of, quote, the invisible hand, punishing those societies for alleged sins against, quote, market laws. Thus, as catastrophes increasingly befall the majority of the world, the victims are blamed for their new deprivation, misery, and oppression. This is a far more effective mode of rule than jackboot terror, which is more overt, but exposes the system to another form of resistance, to keep the majority in a continual state of inner anxiety. Works because people are made too busy securing or competing for their own survival to cooperate in mounting an effective response. This too has Tavistock's signature all over it. Quote, in the past decade, the entire population of the globe has been kept permanently off balance with one financial meltdown and transnational trade fiat after another emptying national coffers and overriding rights of domestic self determination. Populations have been so overwhelmed by the moving juggernaut of economic and environmental crises that a rule of universal insecurity has rendered social majorities paralyzed by a low intensity terror, the necessary condition for any totalitarian movement to continue its advance, because keeping its subjects perpetually off balance is its modus operandi. In previous periods of history, we have seen draconian measures put through at the national level, but we've never seen such an assault on people's rights and democratic standards. Each new measure, viewed on its own, may seem an aberration, but a whole host of changes are as part of an ongoing continuum constitutes a shift towards total enslavement. Total power is a supra-terrestrial correlative of global power which can conceive of no limit to itself. There are many challenges for us to overcome when presented with all the facts, when the evidence is neatly laid out on the table, when the conspirators have been unmasked and defrocked and their deeds shown for all the world to see. Still, the ordinary citizen screams conspiracy, refusing to believe that such a monstrous, mind boggling collusion is real until it is too late. We are at the crossroads, and the roads we take will now terminate whether we will live in the 21st century as a nation state republics or a subjugated, culled, and dehumanized crop of slaves. Dear reader, the situation is extremely grave. We are fighting a combined effort of some of the most brilliant people in history who scheme against us for the purposes of possessing us. But the human will is immortal. Tyrants have killed millions, and yet people fought and eventually won their freedom. Freedom stirs the human heart, and fear stills it. Amidst the deafening cacophony of patriotic silence, how long will they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Insurgent voices command attention. Immortality has its moral basis in truth and incorruptibility. It deserves to be given all the support that it can get. It deserves to be fought and died for. Finally, history teaches by analogy, not identity. The historical experience is not one of staying in the present and looking back. Rather, it is one of going back into the past and returning to the present with a wider and more intense consciousness of the restrictions of our former outlook. Francisco Goya's Plate 79 of Disasters shows the fair maid of liberty flat on her back, bosom exposed. Ghostly figures play about the corpse while monks dig her grave. Truth has died. Murió la verdad. How is that for an alternative? Forewarned is forearmed. It is not up to God to save us. It is up to us. We will never find the right answers if we can't ask the proper questions. And that is the introduction to Daniel Estulin's book. That it was dated in 2011, so 10 years ago. The first chapter is titled Counterinsurgency. And of course, that's a very important topic for me because that was my dad's job, was working for SACSA, the Special Assistant for Counterinsurgency and Special Activities. Now I'm going to go over to EIR because, as I told you, at the very first footnote from the text I read to you was a reference to the LaRouchePub.com website, EIW 1980 article, Tavistock Mother of Planned Madness. So this is 1980, and I think, along with so many other instances, this is another case in which you can see that Lyndon LaRouche was way ahead of most people. And so here's the article, and I'm just going to touch on some of the highlights of this article for a few minutes. The Tavistock Clinic in Sussex, England, is the world center for mass brainwashing and social engineering programs and activities in the post-war period. During the war, Tavistock was the headquarters of the British Army's Psychological Warfare Bureau, which, through the arrangements of the Special Operations Executive, also dictated policy to the United States Armed Forces in matters of psychological warfare. At the end of the war, the Tavistock personnel took over the World Federation of Mental Health and the Psychological Warfare Division at the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, that's SHAEF or SHAEF in Europe. And skipping down, Tavistock's chief theoretician in America, Dr. Kurt Lewin, Lewin, organized the Harvard Psychological Clinic, the MIT Research Center for Group Dynamics, the Institute of Social Research at the University of Michigan. Lewin Also played a pivotal policy role at the psychological department of the OSS, at the Office of Naval Research, the Strategic Bombing Survey, and the Committee on National Morale. Moreover, a large number of influential people at the top policy level were trained in Dr. Lewin's theory of topological psychology, which is to this day the world's most advanced method of behavior modification, parentheses, brainwashing. Other important colleagues of Kurt Lewin, such as Eric Trist and John Rawlings Rees of Tavistock. And John Rawlings Rees, R-E-E-S, is a very, very important name, as well as H.V. Dix, W.R. Bion, another important one, B-I-O-N, R. Crossman, and others took all the personnel from the Strategic Bombing Survey. Now, you remember when George Webb and I were up in Greenbelt, Maryland, and we met with a man who told us about the underground facilities and what were they doing down there? They were working out strategic bombing planning. Isn't that interesting? In World War II, in Greenbelt, Maryland, a secret project and strategic bombing planning having something to do with psychological warfare. Aha. Well, let's read some more. And from this pool founded the RAND Corporation, the Stanford Research Institute, which produced the Aquarian Conspiracy, the Wharton School, the National Training Laboratories, the National Institute of Mental Health, and others. The United States government started contracting multi-million dollar projects with all these outfits. Over a period of 30 years, tens of billions of dollars have been allocated by the federal government to fund the work of these groups. Other tens of billions of dollars found their way into these institutions from private, drumroll, foundations. Over the years, these outfits grew and the scope of their projects continued to grow. Every aspect of the mental and psychological life of the American people was profiled, recorded, and stored into computer memories. This is written in 1980 and speaking in the past tense. Okay? They already had everything. The personnel of these centers of social psychology grew massively in numbers, and after year, it penetrated deeply into every nook and cranny of federal, state, and local governments. Their in-house specialists and graduates were called in to develop policies for welfare departments, labor mediation boards, trade unions, the Air Force, the Navy, the Army, the National Education Association. Hello, teachers. Psychiatric clinics, the works. Over the years, close cooperative relations were developed between these think tanks and the key polling organizations in the country. Whoa. And between them and the major media, Gallup polls, the Yankelovich CBS New York Times polls, the National Opinion Research Center, and others are incessantly conducting psychological profiles of the entire population and share them for evaluation and processing with the ubiquitous social psychologists. What the public sees printed in the newspapers as opinion polls is only an infinitesimal portion of the work that these pollsters really do. Above this closely cooperating group of social psychologists, pollsters, and media manipulators presides the elite, powerful patrons, the gods of Olympus, as they delight in being referred to. These are a cluster of corporations and families on top of the electronics, communications, and related sophisticated technological industries. The core cluster consists, and again, we're talking about 1980 here, of the following: ITT, ATT, Xerox, Rank Organization, Bendix, Raytheon, AD Little, Eagle Star Group, RCA, Bechtel, Textron, Reliance Group, Prudential Insurance, American Express, Lazard Brothers, Kuhn Loeb, Blythe Eastman Dillon, Payne Weber, Petro Canada, Standard Telephones and Cables, and their subsidiary, affiliated, and interlocking corporations. All in all, it is estimated that this group, which on matters of long term strategy tends to act in a very disciplined and unified way, commands over 60 of the top Fortune 500 companies in the USA. It has swallowed up all the other older historical power groups of earlier U.S. history, such as Morgan, Rockefeller, Cabot Lodge, etc., etc. In the deeper recesses of the intelligence establishment in Washington, veteran intelligence officers refer to this awesome group in hushed tones and mysterious language as the Committee of 300. The group prefers to be called the Olympus. They are the real power in the land, the deployers of our social engineers and social psychologists. I'm going to skip ahead to the last little section called Stanford Institute's Images of Man. And I think this is a good image to wrap our little minefield session up with tonight. Stanford Institute's Images of Man from the Executive Intelligence Review, May 13th, 1980. The technical study proposing the complete extirpation of mankind's inner sense of identity, the tearing out of mankind's innermost soul, and the placement in the vacant space of an artificial, synthetic pseudo soul was prepared in May 1974 by the Stanford Research Institute. The contents were later used in popularized form in Marilyn Ferguson's book. The study is entitled Changing Images of Man. Policy Research Report Number 4, prepared by SRI Center for the Study of Social Policy, Willis Harman, Director. The 319-page mimeographed report was prepared by a team of 14 researchers and directed by a supervisory panel of 23 controllers, including Margaret Mead, B.F. Skinner, Erwin Laszlo of the United Nations, Sir Geoffrey Vickers of British Intelligence, and others. The study begins with the argument that the fundamental concept of what mankind is and the quote image that mankind has of itself determines the behavior of mankind. To change mankind's behavior away from industrialism into quote spiritualism, one must first force a change in man's self image, its fundamental conception of what mankind is. To quote, images and fundamental conceptions of human nature and potentialities can have enormous power in shaping the values and actions in a society. We have attempted in this study to, one, illuminate ways our present society, its citizens, and institutions have been shaped by the underlying myths and images of the past and present, to explore with respect to contemporary societal problems the deficiencies of currently held images of mankind, and to identify needed characteristics of future images, and three, to identify high leverage activities that could facilitate the emergence of new images and new policy approaches to resolution of key problems in a society. So the idea that I think we can summarize what we've been thinking about tonight, the unthinkable idea that a highly respected nation, government of a very important and really beloved ally of our country would institute a psychological warfare war, a psychological war against the American people. That's pretty close to unthinkable for most Americans. And that's because we've been trained to think that way. But unless we do face the possibility that Daniel Esterlin and, and Lyndon LaRouche and Eustace Mullins and uh, countless others have got a real serious case, then we very well could be over the slippery slope too far. We may be past the point of no return. And that's why I think this is our work. This is our job as a generation, as people who are, for however long, uh, co-residents of this beautiful planet. Attack on humanity is who we are, taking away our sense of connectedness, of being connected either to a church, to a religion, to a family, to a town, to a bowling league, to a foundation, to a career, to a school you love, or a community you grew up in, to through massive psychological means pull us apart, isolate us, and then impose a series of unending stresses intended to develop what Desmet says is mass formation. And he expelled it out, how it happens. Free floating anxiety. If there's any term that I think that describes the status of your average person walking about doing their daily lives in this country today, it's free floating anxiety. And it's not normal, and it's not healthy, and it's not natural. And when we see the truth of this, we free ourselves. And hopefully, others will take up the example and say, I want to be free too. I'm not going to listen to the narrative any longer. Well, thanks very much for being with me tonight. I hope you guys have a great weekend. I know I'm going to be probably still studying. I'm really into research. If you put any two important words in a search engine and push the button, you're liable to be jumping down a rabbit hole pretty fast, and you'll learn some things that you didn't know, and maybe you'll find something that is really, really amazing, really shocking that you can pass on. So don't just be a couch potato. Jump into the research. Be part of the crowdsourcing of the truth, and pass it on. Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night, and uh, and thanks for joining my Patreon. It does really help pay the bills around here.